All right, Jeremy Miner, welcome to another episode of Closers Are Losers. Today, we brought in a very specialized guest. His name is Dan Englander.
Yeah.
Excuse my French. I'm from Arkansas. My mom says we don't know how to pronounce names down there. So he is the host of Digital Agency Growth Podcast. He's also the CEO and founder of Sales Schema. All right. You know me, pronouncing names, a fractional new business team for marketing agencies and B2B service companies. Now, he uses a proprietary approach called relationship sales at scale. Since 2014, Sales Schema has worked with more than 60 organizations, generated tens of millions of dollars in lifetime revenue, and created thousands of relationships between clients and decision makers at mid to large companies such as Birchbox, Stripe, and Venmo. I love Stripe, actually. We have a big deal with Stripe. Stripe's a great company. Dan is also the author of Relationship Sales at Scale, his new book. We'll talk about that today. And prior to founding Sales Schema, he was the first employee new business lead at Idea Rocket. And in his spare time, he enjoys developing interesting aches and pains via Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, beating people up. I'm just joking. Just defense. And submission grappling. That's so interesting. We're going to have to talk about that today. So let's do this. I want to dive into your story and maybe give our listeners kind of a feel for your background and how you arrived at being authority on sales, marketing, and helping companies really scale. Like, were you born out of your mother's womb with all these skills, or did you acquire them? Like, give us some background.
Yeah, Jeremy, thanks for the great intro. And yeah, I wish I rolled out of the womb with it. Things would be a lot easier, right? But no, so my background, basically I out of college, I moved to New York, worked a couple internships, kind of like landed in the agency space because I've always joked that it's kind of like the dustbin that you end up in if you're here in New York. Worked on the account side for a while, worked kind of back when you could just say we're a social media shop, and agency and companies would give you all their money. And I was the one that would answer problems with broken products on a Facebook wall back when community manager was a title you could have. And anyway, more pertinent to our conversation, I think I landed in sort of a hybrid sales client service role. So I'd spend about half my time selling, half my time onboarding clients for a creative services shop. We basically did a lot of animated video, sold into big companies, tried every tactic under the sun to sell a very abstract kind of creative services product, did inbound, did outbound, learned a whole lot, and then quit and did the whole Tim Ferriss thing for a while to start Sales Schema in about 2014. And then since then, we've actually worked with now probably coming up on 100 organizations to help them keep their pipelines full, get, appointments and all that good stuff, which I can get into.
So let's start here. I've got a couple of questions. So let's talk about your book. Okay. So Relationship Sales at Scale. Let me ask you, I'm going to ask you two questions here. Who did you write the book for? And really, what was behind you writing that book?
Yeah. So I wrote the book for really anybody that's in a complex, probably B2B sales situation. That's the emphasis. But I still think there's a lot of takeaways for any human sales situation. And what was behind the book, the reason I wrote it is I just think that there's a lot of prospecting, more top of the funnel, but kind of all throughout the funnel. There's a lot of sales approaches that are just broken for this day and age. And that's based on a lot of things that have changed. There's some things that are always the same, right? And once you get deeper into the funnel, there's more timelessness. But I think at the top of the funnel, because of competition, because of distraction, because of information parity, because of skepticism, a lot of things have changed. And I just saw so many people succeeding and then sort of being like, everybody that's telling me to do this one way probably has this wrong. And then I saw so many other people just flailing and trying to do these same quantity over quality based automation tactics that don't really work. And that's kind of what informed the book.
Let's talk about these. I think this is an interesting subject, and our audience will definitely appreciate what you're saying, because we talk a lot about how the consumer has changed, but a lot of times salespeople and companies really haven't caught up to those changes. In your mind, what's one or two of the biggest changes that these sales systems that people have been using for all these decades maybe don't realize has changed and they're still using? What are a few things you feel have really changed?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is just the choices and information consumers have. And this isn't anything new. Dan Pink's written a lot about this. We all know this stuff. But we all keep playing by the same playbook, right? We all keep doing the same behaviors, even though things have changed. And that tends to look like going in cold and then expecting to de-risk a call based on features and benefits and the sort of stuff that nobody's paying enough attention to care about yet. Right. So that's the main change.
They hear every single salesperson that ever tries to cold call them basically, hi, my name is, I'm with XYZ company. And the reason why I'm calling you today was, so it instantly screams salesperson trying to sell me something, right? It causes the reptilian part of our brain to go into fight or flight mode. And they could quite literally be saying like, hey, we just called because you won like $500 million. And you would like quite literally try to get them off the phone because you're not even paying attention, right?
Exactly. And I think to dig further into that, as part of that skepticism, the scarce resource is no longer information, right? It's actually trust. It's actually, can I trust this particular service? Like whatever you're selling, we sell lead generation or clients sell agency services, whatever it is, they know, most prospects know generally what you do. The sort of subtle differentiators you have, guess what? They're not paying attention to that yet because they're not in a buying mode yet. Really what they want to know is can I trust this? Is this for me? Is it different? What different, really, what am I going to have my time wasted by talking to you? So that's the barrier we need to get over. And that's the bad news. The good news is because of the internet, because of the resources and data and all these things that we have, it's actually easier to do that than it once was if you do things the right way.
That's right. Let's talk about you. You really help these agencies and companies scale. Okay. What are maybe a few things that you see companies do that really hold them back from getting to the next level? And then maybe how do you solve it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think one of the biggest ones is kind of like, and this is probably a less of a problem for you and your audience, Jeremy, but what we see a lot in the agency space, especially, is treating sales and new business kind of like it's a hobby. There's a lot of bad habits and frankly, like laziness and reactiveness that goes along with building kind of a referral driven business, right? Referrals are great. And there's a lot you can do to be proactive to get referrals, but a lot of the times that, it can make people very complacent.
It's not going to steal you though. Like it's not going to take you to maybe 8 figures, or let alone if you want to get anything above that, maybe even 9 figures, you can't get it off referrals.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of our clients, even ones that have been very successful, even companies that are much bigger and more successful than ours, they get stuck in a situation where they've never really had to figure out their numbers. They don't know what their cost of acquisition is. They don't know, cost of appointment or any of these things. And it takes a lot of trial and error just to get to that baseline of knowing what you should be paying to win a new client. So and then from there, once you have that developed, then you can really add fuel to the fire, and it's just about putting in more inputs, right, to get more outputs. So I think that's a big one. And another one, as part of that is hiring the wrong people in sales, or trying to make a premature hire, right? Trying to find like a superhero that's going to do the hard work for you instead of really figuring out, your product market fit and all these things that have to happen.
Let's talk about that. What's the right order of operations for hiring and training salespeople in your mind?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there are exceptions. I was hired in a situation that's a little bit different, where like when I got hired first, this was a founder, an entrepreneur that wanted to have nothing to do with sales. But the caveat was he got really good with Google ads, and he figured that out. And then he plugged a salesperson into it. Most people don't do that. Most people, again, start with referrals and their networks and then go on from there. So to answer your question, I think the right order of operations is, first, if you're an owner, guess what? Like, you're starting out in that sales seat. It's to get fulfillment and get the back office, the operation stuff off your plate so you can sell more. I don't care if you're doing all aspects of the sales process, you're prospecting, you're selling everything. Right. Once you have that narrowed down, then you're figuring out top of funnel. Companies like ours do that. We're really good at it. Our whole argument is better to hire a village than to hire a person, because of all the skill sets that go into just de-risking calls and prospecting. But anyway, you could hire us, you could hire an individual to get you meetings and to figure out top of funnel. From there, once you've got that figured out, you're sort of rocking and rolling on a process, then you can hire that 6-figure or whatever, that closer role, and get them into that seat. The problem is people do it in the reverse order, and they're like, oh man, I talked to this amazing enterprise salesperson. We're just going to hire them, send them up, give them some collateral, and then expect that to work. And it rarely does.
And that rarely works, right? Because they don't know they don't know the business like the owner does, right? So they just kind of go out there and try to wing it themselves, right?
they're trying to wing it. And also most of the time, those people, like the successes that they have are from an existing structure, right? They come from it doesn't have to be a big company, but they come from a company where they're either getting leads or there's a process for them or whatever.
Yeah.
And then that's not always there. And then that person kind of flounders a lot of the time.
Or leaves, right? Now, hey, let's talk. There's some things in your book. You talk about this concept of like how to tastefully dig up gold that's right under your feet. Tell us what you mean by that in the book.
Yeah, it's a great question. So back to the referral thing, right? We had so many clients, like we get all our business from referrals and we'd like yell at them and say, hey, that's not sustainable. And it's true, it's not really sustainable. It's not, but also referrals are still great, right? And we all kind of like network and we focus on like getting this meandering referral. Or on the other side, people are like, well, I'm just going to go in cold and spam my prospects and expect to get them to get them to talk to me. But the fact is there's this sort of middle ground where it's like, what if you could do referral marketing and referral selling in a much more targeted way, right? Where it's like, so to get more tangible with that, the gold that's like under a client's feet, we had a client, they're doing giant event marketing. They do like multi 6-figure events for enterprise blue chip tech companies. Our client had a great network. So we said, okay, first there's this list of companies and list of prospects that you want to talk to over here. We have this other list over here of all of your connections, on LinkedIn. Now everybody's like, I got all these fake connections. There's people I don't know. Great. Take them all out. Just take out anybody else you don't want to talk to. So now you're left with this cohort of like 100 people who you actually know and actually are willing to talk to. We can then go find everybody that they know that's on your prospect list and sort of Venn diagram those two groups. And then you're doing networking. There's still work. Like you're talking to those people and saying, hey, can you refer me to Bob, who's like the CMO of Lenovo? But at least you're doing it in a more targeted way, right? And you're like doing it in a way that's batched up and focused. So you're essentially just like, batching up referrals into the right companies. So that's the sort of thing that, people can do right now. Like you talk to you and your partners or your team, make a list of everybody you're willing to talk to, then find out who they know in the companies you want to know, and then go get referred. The problem is we all just kind of like do it in this meandering way, right? And that doesn't work so well.
So what you're saying is like, there's no organization behind it. The business owner will be like, hey, go get some referrals from existing clients, but they don't really like step by step, like show them what to say, probably how to react. And then basically like, here's what you're going to do every day to actually accomplish this. It's just like, go get some referrals. And then nobody really does anything for the most part.
Well, exactly. And the problem is when people go out to get referrals, typically they put so much work on the other person where they're like, hey, do you know anybody that fits the bill for this way? But the problem with that is they've got to then go do a lot of work thinking about it. They've got to think about who in their network that they know well enough that they can feel comfortable introducing you to. An entirely different ball game is being able to say, hey, I saw these 3 specific people. Do you actually know them? Because sometimes you might not. And if so, would you feel comfortable dropping me an intro? Yes. Okay, great. I'll follow up with a template that you can use right now, and that'll make things easier, right?
Yeah.
That's a completely different conversation.
So that's more predictable for the account reps to actually do and follow through with, right? I like
exactly.
That. Now, in the book, you also talk in the book about there's a lot of noise going on, right? Ads all over the place. Everybody's being sold to all the time. I think I even talked about that with you when I was on your show.
Yeah.
Competition. You say that salespeople should rethink almost everything. Why is that? I agree with you. Why is that?
I mean, I think the biggest reason is that the only thing the salesperson actually controls is where they put their time, right? At the end of the day, like we're not hypnotists. We can't make somebody spend money that really isn't a fit or doesn't want to or whatever. And I think the rethinking is that there's so many salespeople just wasting their time over optimizing for the wrong metrics and going in cold and then expecting that to work. And they're pissing off people in the process on a technical level, getting domain shut down, whatever that might be, or else just not having the same level of success as they otherwise could be. That's a huge part of the market or a huge part of the audience. The other part of the audience are all the salespeople that are thinking that they have to go in cold, the opposite of cold. They have to over personalize everything, write a custom love letter to their prospect, never ask anybody to do anything. And that doesn't really work either. So that's there's a lot more I could drill into there, but that I think is kind of like the fundamental area where the rethinking needs to happen.
So, okay, so not basically don't become their friend, right? Where you're just sending them love letters where they don't value you, right? So we talk a lot about that at Seventh Levels. We talk about in any conversation that you go into, whether it's an email, whether it's a text, whether it's a phone call or in-person meeting or on Zoom, it doesn't matter. You're coming in with you have to establish what we call a status frame, right? So you have to come in with an equal status where they view you as oh, this person is an expert with what they're offering, right? They have to at least view you as at least at their level, right? And a lot of words that salespeople use, like emailing them, if they didn't buy and 6 months later, they're emailing them back, I'm just following up or I'm just checking in. Well, those are sales lingo words that the prospect has heard a billion times. So it triggers them in their brain to, go into, like we talked about, fight or flight mode, where they're just trying to protect themselves. So they don't respond to those emails. They don't respond to those texts. Because when you use the words, I always say that, never use the F-bomb in sales. I'm just following up or I'm just checking in. You might as well tell the prospect hey, I'm just calling to, get you to buy something so I can make money. Because that's how the prospect interprets those type of words that every salesperson ever uses. So we have to relanguage what we're saying, right? That triggers them oh, I want to engage back with that person, right? So during that conversation, we have to start raising our status. And we can only do that in the prospect's mind by certain questions that we ask with our tone, right?
Right.
Trigger them to start viewing us differently than they view all these other salespeople trying to sell them all the time. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah. And then the devil's kind of in the details in terms of how do you approach that with people that you don't know yet, right? Because that haven't agreed to take the call with you. And I think once you have that call, then things kind of become, more timeless in a way. Yeah. But at the top of the funnel, what we tend to see is you're probably getting this in your inbox now if you're listening, this arms race of somebody finding out a lot about you and then regurgitating that information back to you. Hey, Jeremy, I saw you have a podcast. You have X many episodes. You just had this conversation with Dan about this thing, or how many times have you gotten that? But
I get it 25 times a day. I don't even look at those.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing that's timeless is what if somebody were to say, "Hey, Jeremy, can you remind me? You said you're from Arkansas originally." If somebody were to say, "I saw you're from Arkansas. I actually grew up, Little Rock. I've worked a lot in the sales training space for the last 30 years. I'm actually not that far from you, and I saw you working on this other thing that's relevant to what I'm doing." You'd be more likely to take that call. It's not a for sure that you would, but you wouldn't be mad at it. The percentage likelihood of you taking that goes up a whole lot. And that's the sort of thing that, we really believe is the only thing that's timeless and the only thing that works is finding out this. It's almost like this Dunbar's number thing where there's a number of relationships you can have, but then there's another layer out past that, which is the prospects that would talk to you based on a commonality that you have that haven't talked to you yet. So that's really the best starting place. And that's the more kind of about digging up the gold under your feet. Yeah.
You also talk in the book about there's a right balance between personalization and scale in sales and marketing. Break down what that means for everybody.
Yeah. So it's basically, if you go too far in one way, things break. Like I talked about, you go too far towards automation, you piss off people and it doesn't work. You go too far towards love letter and you don't do there's no output and it falls apart and nothing works as well. So it's really about coming up with the whatever size list that you need so that everybody that's on that list thinks that you wrote a message just for them. You have to create the just for me effect.
Visualizing that message rather than just the cookie cutter messages that we all get a billion times a day.
Correct. Yeah. It has to be personalized to some degree, but it can't be so personalized that you can't send out X number per day. And now that X is going to depend on your market, right? If you're selling to unicorns, that live on a yacht, that's probably going to be smaller numbers than if you're selling to pizza shops or something, right? So, but there has to be, whatever that degree is. In our world, I'll give some context. We are selling agencies and other B2B service companies into large companies. We're probably sending out about 50 to 100 average, contacting 50 to 100 people per business day. Now that list is enough where we can find a certain cohort that shares a commonality with our client, right? Right now, we have a client that his grandmother was this mayor of a town in the Midwest or in Kentucky. So we're contacting prospects regional to that area and referencing this connection. It's worked really well. And that's now, a certain cohort that you can actually find that list and then get a much higher agreement to meeting and that kind of thing. So even if you don't forget that crazy, like it doesn't have to be that complicated, but just thinking about, instead of like, we've heard so much about avatars and like, all these different things, and that stuff matters. But instead of just thinking about your best client, think about your best client who would also be willing to talk to you based on something that you have in common, and start with that, because that's going to keep the pipeline full a lot better.
Yeah. And it's almost focusing on like problems that most of the people you're contacting could possibly have, right? Like they're like, oh, that's me. Like, oh, I have that problem sometime. Because if you can associate problems that most people would know about, even if they don't have it, but they know that that's a problem in their industry, that triggers sometimes where you're more, instead of focusing just on your solution, you're focused on, you're not saying this, but you're getting them to think like you're focused on like certain problems they might have, which triggers into like, oh, that's me. And then you could get actually a message back, because they might be going through that problem. And if they're not going to probably message you back, but at least they can associate that with something.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's good to frame out like what outbound is and where it lives, right? Because like if you think of the market like this big parabolic wave, you have 3% of the market that's looking for a solution, on one end, and they're probably going to convert through inbound or through referral, or maybe you get lucky and you contact them at the right time. You have another 3% that will never hire you for whatever reason, and then you have this big zone of people who are problem aware that are like, I'm not quite happy. I don't really know what else is out there. And they will take your call, but you just have to finesse it. You have to get in in the right way.
Like I said, we always talk about like most prospects when we originally talk to them, even the 3% that are looking don't really know what their real problems are. Or maybe they understand they have a problem, but they don't really know how bad the problem is, right? Or maybe they don't understand the consequences and ramifications of what happens if they don't do anything about those problems. So your questioning ability, right? Like getting them to go below the surface, it triggers them to start to see all these newfound problems that maybe they didn't know they had. Like that's what we talk about, building the gap. Here's where they are, current state. Here's where they want to be, their objective state. What's the gap in the middle? These newfound problems that your ability to communicate with them help them see they have that they didn't know they had before, really.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the way that I'm thinking about everything, because it's what we do all day, and if there's a lot more to sales than this, but it's our world, is like email copy, right? Which like what's going to go in that small amount of space that you have. And a lot of the times, Jeremy, to your point, it's one question. And like one of the most common things that we found to work is we'll ask, hey, do you have a dedicated salesperson, or do you fulfill XYZ criteria? If not, sorry to bug you. Because it's forcing them to kind of qualify themselves to you, and it checks that the thing is in place that you need to be successful. You're asking
for permission. Like, I'm not even sure we could help. So it's like you're asking a few questions, and if they're in that category, then you could possibly help them, but you don't know for sure. That's why you're asking like permission, almost, in a sense. It's good.
Exactly. Yeah. That works quite well.
What's one important question that because we have, obviously we have a lot of professional salespeople on here that sell B2B or B2C. We've got consultants on here that watch the show, coaches. We've got consultants. We've got, entrepreneurs, just starting out solopreneurs. And we've got very large companies, owners that watch the show as well. But what's one important question that every new entrepreneur in your mind should be asking themselves before they start their business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the biggest one is like, for an entrepreneur is, where, and this might not sound that original, but it's like, where do I have a unique edge? Yeah. Or maybe a better way to frame that is like, where can I move at least twice as fast as as somebody else that's having the exact same consideration right now somewhere else in the world?
Yeah.
Right. I think for me, and I'm not, I've broad framed this a little through the years, where it's not just about like one niche. You don't have to find one niche, but I think for me personally, it was way easier to start with an area that I knew, because like there's all these little idiosyncrasies and all this knowledge that you have of that particular space that is more useful. But I think a lot of the times when I talk to earlier stage entrepreneurs, they're thinking about day trading more, right? So they're like, what's hot right now? What market's up? What market's down? That stuff matters. But I think that it creates a lot of shiny object syndrome, and there's a lot of like success that you might be seeing it from afar, and you're not really seeing like all the years and all the work that went into that person or that company having that success.
I like that.
So anyway, it's kind of a meandering answer.
Any final thoughts or advice for our listeners?
Yeah. I think, I mean, I don't know if it's advice as much as just kind of like what I'm focusing on these days is just sort of thinking about, like where my time's going, and the idea that like opportunities are kind of like a pair of pants, right? Like an opportunity for you might not be an opportunity for me, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think that especially like in an earlier stage of entrepreneurship, if you can think about an opportunity as like custom to you or not custom or not fitting to you, that creates a lot of reduction of FOMO and a lot better table selection, to use kind of a poker metaphor.
So focus on your time and make sure that it's being used at the most valuable place. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, which sounds trite, I guess, a little bit, but I think the opportunity thing's better, right? Where it's like opportunities are not created or not created equal; they're very custom, right?
Sure.
Very
I like that. Where can our listeners learn more about you, your training, your services? I know we have a lot of people, that have agencies that watch us. So where can they learn more about you?
Yeah. So salesschema.com/podcast. That's the best place to kind of check out our backlog of the digital agency growth podcasts. A lot of other resources there too. And my email is just dan@salesschema.com.
I like it. Okay, we'll have that link there for our audience to be able to click on, because I do know we have a lot of agencies and different stuff that follow us here on the podcast and everything. So, Dan, thanks for being on here. It was a pleasure to have you on here. Thanks for having me on your show a while ago. That was awesome. Had a great experience, and looking forward to seeing how your company even grows even bigger than it is now. So, congratulations. Well done on everything you've done so far.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And likewise, same to you. And I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, we should be live with Jeremy's episode on our show very soon, and really excited about that one. So definitely encourage everybody to check that out. Perfect.
All right, everybody. We'll put the link here, especially if you're like an agency and you're looking for, somebody like Dan's help to really scale your business. This is a guy definitely that we brought onto the show because he actually has services that actually are good and he gets his clients results. We have a lot of people that approach us getting on the show all the time. When we check them out, I'm like, I don't know if they really get results for the clients, but Dan definitely does. His company definitely does get people results. So that's why we wanted to bring you on the show. So thanks for being on.
Thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. And let's do it again.
All right, good man. Hey guys, if you enjoyed these, here's another you can watch. Join our free Sales Revolution group. Click the link below, join us, and we're going to help you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you real soon.